In the heart of Beverly Hills, there was a luxury restaurant known for its fine dining and elegant atmosphere. The kind of place where people dressed their best, ordered dishes with names they could barely pronounce, and whispered about how much everything cost. It was the kind of restaurant that made you feel important or intimidated depending on your mood. On this particular afternoon, a young waiter was having one of those days where nothing seemed to go right. His name tag might as well have read "stressed out," because he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. From the moment his shift started, things had been falling apart. He'd burned his hand on a hot plate, spilled coffee on two customers who weren't exactly thrilled about it, and now his shoes were pinching so badly that every step felt like punishment. This waiter wasn't new to the job. He'd been working at the restaurant for over a year. But lately, he'd started feeling trapped. Every day blended into the next, filled with entitled customers snapping their fingers and demanding perfection. To him, these patrons all looked the same, wealthy, impatient, and oblivious to the hard work happening behind the scenes. So when an older gentleman walked in wearing a simple suit and tie, the waiter didn't think twice. He assumed this guy was just another rich client looking to show off. The man took a seat at a corner table, quietly scanning the room. There was something calm and steady about him, but the waiter didn't notice. All he saw was another customer expecting 5-star treatment. As he approached the table, forcing a smile onto his face, the waiter tried to push aside his frustration. "Good afternoon," he said, sliding the menu across the table. "Are you ready to order?" The man glanced up, his deep voice cutting through the hum of conversation in the restaurant. "Yes, thank you," he replied. "I'll have the steak medium rare and perhaps some water for now." His tone was polite, almost soothing, but the waiter wasn't paying attention. Instead, he scribbled the order down quickly, already thinking about the next task on his never-ending list. As he turned to leave, the waiter muttered under his breath, "Of course, the most expensive thing on the menu." He didn't mean for anyone to hear, but the man caught it. For a split second, their eyes met and the waiter froze. But instead of getting angry or calling him out, the man simply smiled, a small, knowing smile, and went back to looking at the room. The waiter exhaled sharply, shaking off the awkwardness, and hurried toward the kitchen. He told himself it didn't matter. This guy was probably just another spoiled diner who wouldn't even remember him by the end of the meal. What the waiter didn't know was that this quiet, unassuming man owned not only this restaurant, but several others around the country, and while he hadn't reacted to the insult, he definitely noticed it. Back in the kitchen, the chaos continued. Orders piled up, tempers flared, and the staff moved like machines, trying to keep up with the lunch rush. When the chef called out, "The man's order?" the waiter grabbed the plate carelessly, still simmering with frustration. Balancing the dish in one hand and a pitcher of water in the other, he navigated through the crowded dining area, muttering complaints under his breath about how difficult these customers could be. But then, disaster struck. Just as he reached the man's table, the waiter tripped slightly on the edge of the carpet. The plate wobbled, and before he could steady it, gravy spilled onto the man's crisp white shirt. Time seemed to stop as the waiter stared in horror at the dark stain spreading across the fabric. I'm so sorry," he stammered, grabbing a napkin and offering it to the man. "Let me get this cleaned up for you." To his surprise, the man didn't explode in anger or demand to speak to a manager. Instead, he took the napkin, dabbed lightly at the stain, and chuckled softly. "No harm done," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "These things happen." For a moment, the waiter felt relieved. Maybe this guy wasn't so bad after all. But then, overwhelmed by embarrassment and frustration, he blurted out, "You know, if you weren't so picky, maybe things wouldn't get messed up." The words flew out of his mouth before he could stop them. Instantly, he regretted it, but the damage was done. The man's expression didn't change. He just looked at the waiter for a long moment as if studying him. Then, with a slight nod, he returned to his meal, leaving the waiter standing there, mortified and unsure of what to do next. The rest of the day felt like a blur for the waiter. After the embarrassing incident with the gravy spill and his poorly timed outburst, He couldn't shake off the feeling that he'd just ruined his chances at keeping this job. Every time he passed the man's table, he avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy adjusting napkins or refilling water glasses for other customers. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on his tasks, his mind kept replaying the moment over and over again. He wondered if the man had already complained to the manager. Maybe he was waiting until after his meal to demand an apology, or worse, ask for him to be fired. The thought made the waiter's stomach churn. He'd worked too hard to get this job, and losing it would mean struggling even more to make ends meet. As the lunch rush began winding down, the tension in the air only grew thicker. Each tick of the clock felt like a countdown to disaster. Finally, when the man finished his meal and stood up to leave, the waiter braced himself. Would he call him out now? Say something cutting as he walked away? Instead, the man simply nodded politely at the hostess near the exit and disappeared through the door without another word. For a brief moment, the waiter allowed himself to breathe again. Maybe he'd gotten lucky. Maybe the man hadn't cared enough to cause trouble. But deep down, he knew better. People like that didn't let things slide, not in a place like this. They expected perfection, and anything less was unacceptable. So when the manager approached him later that evening and asked him to come to her office, the waiter wasn't surprised. His heart sank as he followed her down the hallway, his mind racing with excuses and apologies he hoped might soften the blow. When they entered the office, the waiter froze. Sitting there, relaxed and calm, was the same man from earlier, the one whose shirt he'd ruined, the one he'd insulted without realizing who he was. Panic surged through him. Was this some kind of setup? Had the man come back to confront him personally? The waiter opened his mouth to apologize again, but before he could say anything, the man raised a hand to stop him. "Relax," the man said, his voice smooth and steady. "We're not here to punish you." Those words caught the waiter completely off guard. If anything, they made him even more nervous. What did this guy want from him? Why wasn't he angry? The manager gestured for the waiter to take a seat, so he sank into the chair across from them, gripping its arms tightly. The man leaned forward slightly, studying him with an expression that was neither judgmental nor amused. It was simply curious. "Tell me," he began, "how are you finding your work here?" The question threw the waiter off balance. No one had ever asked him that before, not like this anyway. Usually feedback came in the form of complaints or terse instructions during staff meetings. This felt different. Unsure of what to say, he hesitated, then decided to go with the truth. "It's tough," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I mean, I try my best, but sometimes it feels like nothing I do is good enough. Customers expect everything to be perfect, and when it's not..." He trailed off, shrugging helplessly. "And honestly, it's exhausting." For a moment, there was silence. The man listened intently, nodding slowly as if weighing every word. Then he spoke again. "You know, I understand where you're coming from. When I first started in this business, I worked long hours for little pay, doing jobs no one else wanted to do. It can wear you down if you let it." The waiter blinked, surprised by the admission. He'd always assumed people like this man, the ones who owned restaurants and wore expensive suits, had never experienced hardship. Hearing him talk about struggling early in his career felt surreal. "But here's the thing," the man continued. "The key to surviving and thriving in this industry is learning how to channel that frustration into something productive. Passion is valuable, even when it's misdirected. You clearly care about what you're doing, even if it doesn't always show in the way you handle situations." The waiter swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons why working here felt impossible, but another part of him recognized the truth in what the man was saying. He did care, even if he often felt invisible and unappreciated. Before he could say anything, the manager chimed in. "This restaurant means a lot to us," she said, glancing at the man beside her. "And we believe in giving people second chances. That's why we'd like to offer you an opportunity to grow, to learn, and maybe even help shape the future of this place." The waiter stared at her, stunned. An opportunity? What kind of opportunity? And why were they offering it? To him after everything that had happened today? Before he could ask, the man smiled faintly and added, "Let's just say we think you have potential. Potential that deserves a chance to shine." It wasn't until the meeting ended and the waiter stepped back into the bustling restaurant that reality hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just any man sitting in that office. It was the owner of the entire establishment, the person whose name was on the building, whose reputation depended on the success of places like this. And somehow, despite everything, he saw something in the waiter worth saving. Overwhelmed and humbled, the waiter returned to his duties, his mind buzzing with questions. Who was this man, really? How had he managed to turn such a disastrous encounter into an opportunity? Most importantly, what exactly did this opportunity entail? Whatever it was, the waiter knew one thing for sure. His life, and his career, was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, the waiter arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. He couldn't sleep much the night before, his mind racing with questions about what lay ahead. The owner's words kept replaying in his head. Potential. Second, chances. Help shape the future. It all sounded nice, almost too good to be true. Was this some sort of test? Or maybe a way to keep an eye on him before letting him go? Either way, he decided to show up ready, determined not to waste whatever opportunity had been handed to him. When he walked in, the manager greeted him with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Good morning," she said. "We're starting your training today. The owner wants you to get a full picture of how things run around here." Training? This wasn't what he expected. He thought he'd just be doing more waiting tables, but now it seemed like they were serious about teaching him something bigger. The first stop was the kitchen. Normally, waiters didn't spend much time back there unless they were picking up orders or delivering plates. But today the head chef welcomed him like he was part of the team. "You ever worked in a kitchen before?" the chef asked, raising an eyebrow. The waiter shook his head. "Nope, just out front." The chef chuckled. "Well, buckle up. You're about to learn where the magic happens." For hours, the waiter shadowed the kitchen staff, watching as they chopped vegetables, seared steaks, and plated dishes with precision. At first he felt out of place, awkwardly standing off to the side while everyone else moved with practiced efficiency. But slowly he started asking questions. Why did they use certain ingredients? How did they decide which dishes went on the menu? The chefs answered patiently, explaining that every choice was deliberate, from the seasoning blends to the arrangement of garnishes. For the first time, the waiter realized how much effort went into creating each plate he served. By the end of the day, his clothes smelled like garlic and smoke, and his feet ached from standing for hours. But he also felt a spark of excitement. These weren't just meals, they were works of art crafted by people who took pride in their craft. And suddenly, he understood why customers complained when something wasn't perfect. It wasn't just entitlement. They paid for excellence, and excellence required attention to detail. Over the next few days, the waiter's crash course continued. He spent time with the inventory team, learning how to track supplies and manage costs. He sat in on meetings with suppliers, listening as they discussed quality standards and pricing. He even tagged along with the cleaning crew one evening, scrubbing floors and polishing silverware until the place gleamed. Each task gave him a new perspective on the restaurant's operations, making him see it less as a job and more as a living, breathing entity. But the most eye-opening experience came when the owner invited him to sit down for a conversation. It wasn't in the office this time, but at a quiet table in the dining room after hours. The waiter hesitated before taking a seat, unsure of what to expect. The owner leaned back in his chair, studying him thoughtfully. "So," the owner began, "what do you think so far?" The waiter paused, collecting his thoughts. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "I mean, I had no idea how much work goes into running this place. I always thought my job was hard, but now I see it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle." The owner nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Every role matters, whether you're cooking, serving, or cleaning. No one succeeds alone. That's why I wanted you to understand the whole process, not just your part in it." The waiter frowned slightly. "But why me? I messed up big time the other day. Most people would have fired me on the spot." The owner smiled faintly. "Because mistakes are how we grow. You showed passion, even if it came out sideways. And besides, I've made plenty of mistakes myself over the years. If I'd given up every time something went wrong, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you." That comment hit home. For so long the waiter had seen himself as stuck, trapped in a thankless job with no way out. But hearing the owner talk about his own struggles made him realize that success wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about learning from it. As weeks went by, the waiter began applying what he'd learned. He noticed small things he'd overlooked before, like how the hostess juggled reservations to keep the flow smooth, or how the bartenders remembered regulars' drink orders without being asked. He started offering suggestions during staff meetings, pointing out areas where improvements could be made. Some ideas worked, others didn't, but instead of brushing him off, the team listened. They appreciated his fresh perspective, especially since he'd seen the inner workings of nearly every department. One evening, after a particularly busy dinner service, the manager pulled him aside. "You're doing great," she said with a genuine smile. "People are noticing the difference you're making." Those words meant more to him than she probably realized. For the first time in ages, he felt valued, not just as a worker, but as someone who contributed meaningfully to the team. Still, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, lying awake in bed, he wondered if he was truly cut out for this. Could someone like him really rise above the chaos and make a difference? Whenever those thoughts crept in, he reminded himself of the owner's belief in him. If the man who owned the restaurant saw potential, maybe it was time he started believing in himself too. Little did the waiter know, his journey was only beginning. What started as a simple act of kindness from the owner was turning into something far greater, a chance to rewrite his story one lesson at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the waiter began to settle into his new rhythm. It wasn't easy, far from it, but he found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The days were still long, and there were moments when the stress threatened to overwhelm him. But now he had something to hold on to, the belief that he was building something meaningful. One of the biggest changes came in how he interacted with the customers. Before, he'd seen them as obstacles, people who demanded too much and never appreciated the effort behind the scenes. But now, armed with a deeper understanding of the restaurant's inner workings, he approached them differently. He listened more carefully to their requests, offered recommendations based on what he'd learned in the kitchen, and even remembered little details about regulars' preferences. To his surprise, these small gestures made a huge difference. Customers started complimenting his service, leaving positive reviews, and tipping generously. For the first time, he realized that being a waiter wasn't just about taking orders. It was about creating an experience. The staff noticed the shift too. The same guy who used to snap at coworkers or mutter under his breath during busy shifts was now stepping up to help others. If someone dropped a tray or fell behind on orders, he didn't roll his eyes or complain. Instead, he pitched in without hesitation. One evening, after a particularly chaotic dinner rush, the head chef pulled him aside. "You've changed," the chef said, wiping his hands on a towel. "What happened?" The waiter shrugged, smiling sheepishly. "I guess I finally figured out that we're all in this together. If one of us struggles, we all do." The chef nodded approvingly. "Good mindset, keep it up." But the real turning point came during a lunch service that tested everything he'd learned so far. A frazzled server, a newer employee, accidentally dropped an entire tray of dishes right in the middle of the dining room. Glasses shattered, food splattered across the floor, and several nearby tables erupted in startled gasps. The poor server froze, her face pale with panic, unsure of what to do next. For a moment, chaos reigned. Some customers looked annoyed, while others simply stared in disbelief. The manager rushed over to assess the situation, but before she could say anything, the waiter stepped in. Calmly and confidently, he addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Please allow us a moment to clean this up and ensure your meals arrive promptly. In the meantime, may I offer you complimentary drinks while we sort this out?" His voice carried authority, cutting through the tension like a knife. The customers murmured their approval, and within minutes, the mood shifted. Staff members sprang into action, clearing the mess and refilling orders as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the waiter stayed by the server's side, quietly reassuring her that everything would be okay. "We've all been there," he told her. "Don't let it shake you. Just focus on the next step." By the end of the service, not only had the situation been resolved smoothly, but the server walked away feeling supported rather than humiliated. Watching from afar, the owner couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the kind of leadership he'd hoped to nurture. Later that week, the owner invited the waiter to join him for another conversation, this time over coffee in the restaurant's private lounge. As they sat across from each other, the owner leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "You handled that incident beautifully," he said. "It reminded me of something important. True leaders aren't defined by their titles. They're defined by how they respond in moments of crisis." The waiter shifted uncomfortably, unused to receiving such praise. "I just did what needed to be done," he replied modestly. "Honestly, I wouldn't have known how to handle it if I hadn't seen you do the same thing back when I spilled gravy on your shirt." The owner chuckled softly. "Ah, yes, that day. Funny how things come full circle, isn't it?" They talked for a while longer, discussing everything from customer relations to team dynamics. At one point, the owner asked, "Have you ever thought about managing a place like this someday? Maybe even owning your own restaurant?" The question caught the waiter off guard. Owning a restaurant? Him? The idea seemed absurd, at least at first. But as he considered it, he realized that the past few months had planted a seed of possibility in his mind. He'd gone from seeing himself as a cog in the machine to someone capable of making meaningful contributions. Why stop there? "I don't know," he admitted hesitantly. "It sounds amazing, but also impossible. I'm not sure I have what it takes." The owner studied him for a moment before responding. "Let me tell you something. When I started out, I didn't think I had what it took either. But here's the secret. No one does at first. Success is built brick by brick, mistake by mistake. You don't need to have everything figured out right away. What you need is the willingness to learn and grow." Those words stuck with the waiter long after their conversation ended. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into his work with renewed determination. He paid closer attention to the business side of things, asking questions about profit, margins, marketing strategies, and customer retention. He observed how the owner handled conflicts, negotiated deals, and inspired loyalty among the staff. Slowly but surely, he began to envision a future where he might take those lessons and apply them to his own venture. Of course, not every day was smooth sailing. There were still tough moments, times when the pressure felt unbearable or when self-doubt crept in. But whenever that happened, he reminded himself of the journey he'd already been on. From the waiter who once muttered insults under his breath to the leader who now guided others through challenges, he'd come a long way. And he knew that whatever lay ahead, he wouldn't face it alone. Word of his transformation spread beyond the restaurant walls. Regular patrons began mentioning him in glowing reviews, praising not just his attentiveness but also the warmth and professionalism he brought to every interaction. Even local food critics took notice, highlighting the establishment's improved atmosphere and seamless service. When interviewed for a feature article, the waiter credited the owner for believing in him when no one else did. "He taught me that success isn't built alone," he said sincerely. "It's shaped by those who give you a chance to prove yourself." Little by little, the restaurant became known not just for its exquisite cuisine, but also for the camaraderie and dedication of its staff. And at the center of it all stood the waiter, the man who'd once thought he was invisible, now shining brightly as a testament to the power of second chances. The restaurant's growing reputation brought more than just happy customers and glowing reviews. It brought opportunities, One afternoon, the owner called the waiter into his office again. This time, there was a hint of excitement in the air. Sitting across from him, the owner slid a folder across the desk. "Take a look at this," he said with a small smile. Inside the folder were plans for a new project, a second location of the restaurant, set to open in another part of the city. The concept was slightly different, focusing on a more casual dining experience while still maintaining the high standards that made the original place successful. As the waiter flipped through the documents, floor plans, menu ideas, marketing, strategies, he felt a mix of awe and confusion. "What does this have to do with me?" he asked cautiously, looking up from the papers. The owner leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I want you to help lead it." For a moment, the waiter thought he'd misheard. Lead it? Him? Sure, he'd come a long way since that disastrous day when he'd spilled gravy on the man's shirt. But running an entire restaurant felt like stepping onto a stage he wasn't ready for. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "I mean, I've learned a lot, but I'm not exactly experienced." "That's why I'm here," the owner replied calmly. "You don't need to know everything, right? Wait, what you do have is passion, grit, and the ability to learn quickly. Those are the qualities that matter most. Besides, I'll be guiding you every step of the way." The waiter sat silently, letting the weight of the offer sink in. It was one thing to dream about owning a restaurant someday. It was another to actually take the reins of one before he even turned 30. But as nervous as he felt, he couldn't deny the spark of excitement flickering inside him. This was his chance, not just to prove himself, but to create something meaningful. Over the next few months, the preparation for the new location became all-consuming. The waiter worked closely with architects, designers, and chefs, learning how to turn a vision into reality. He attended meetings with suppliers, negotiated contracts, and even helped craft the menu, drawing inspiration from dishes he'd seen prepared in the kitchen of the original restaurant. Each task pushed him out of his comfort zone, forcing him to grow in ways he never expected. One of the biggest challenges came during staff training. Hiring and managing a team was completely new territory for him, and he worried about making mistakes. But the owner reminded him of something important. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about creating an environment where people feel supported and valued. With that advice in mind, the waiter focused on building relationships with the new hires, sharing stories of his own journey and encouraging them to speak up if they had ideas or concerns. Despite the long hours and endless to-do lists, there were moments of joy along the way. Watching the empty space transform into a vibrant restaurant filled him with pride. Seeing the team come together, each member contributing their unique skills, gave him hope for what they could achieve. And when the grand opening finally arrived, standing behind the counter as the first customers walked in felt like a dream come true. The night of the launch was a whirlwind of activity. Friends, family, local influencers, and curious diners packed the room, eager to see what the buzz was about. The waiter moved between tables, greeting guests, answering questions, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. For once, he didn't feel overwhelmed by the chaos. He thrived in it. Every smile, every compliment, every satisfied nod from a customer reinforced the belief that he was exactly where he was meant to be. When the evening ended and the last guest left, the waiter stood in the middle of the bustling kitchen, exhausted but exhilarated. The owner joined him, clapping him on the shoulder. "Not bad for your first night," he said with a grin. "Not bad," the waiter echoed, laughing despite himself. "This was incredible. I can't believe we pulled it off." "You did more. Then pull it off," the owner replied. "You proved something to yourself tonight. Remember that feeling, the confidence, the pride, because it's going to carry you forward." In the weeks that followed, the new restaurant quickly gained traction. Customers loved the cozy atmosphere, the friendly service, and the creative twists on classic dishes. Local newspapers praised its innovative approach, and social media posts flooded in with photos of beautifully plated meals. For the waiter-turned-manager, the success was both thrilling and humbling. He knew none of it would have been possible without the lessons he'd learned. and the second chance he'd been given. But the real reward came in the form of the connections he built. Whether it was chatting with regulars who became like family or mentoring young employees finding their footing in the industry, the waiter realized that running a restaurant wasn't just about food or profits. It was about creating a community, a place where people felt welcome, cared for, and inspired. As the months passed, the waiter found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. From the days of dreading every shift to now leading a thriving business, his transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Yet he never forgot the man who had believed in him when no one else did. Their bond had grown stronger over time, evolving from mentor and protege to something closer to friends. One evening, after closing up the restaurant, the owner stopped by for a visit. They sat at a corner table, sipping coffee and reminiscing about the journey so far. "You've done well," the owner said, his tone warm with pride. "Better than I ever imagined." The waiter smiled, shaking his head. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You saw something in me when I couldn't see it myself. And now," the owner added, "you're seeing it in others. That's how the cycle continues." Those words stayed with the waiter long after the owner left. They reminded him of the responsibility that came with success, not just to keep pushing forward, but to lift others up along the way. Because ultimately, the story wasn't just about him. It was about the power of believing in someone, even when they doubted themselves. And it was proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the biggest transformations. As the new restaurant settled into its rhythm, the waiter-turned-manager found himself reflecting on the ripple effect of his journey. The lessons he'd learned weren't just shaping him, they were influencing everyone around him. His team, many of whom had started with little experience, were growing too. Some showed a knack for leadership, stepping up to handle tough situations. Others discovered hidden talents, like crafting innovative dishes or creating memorable dining experiences for guests. Watching them thrive reminded him of how the owner had once seen potential in him. One evening, after a particularly busy dinner service, the manager gathered the staff for a quick meeting. It wasn't about numbers or performance reviews. It was about gratitude. "You all make this place special," he said, looking around at their tired but smiling faces. "I know it's not always easy, but what we're building here is bigger than any one of us, and I'm proud of every single one of you." The room erupted in applause, and though it caught him off guard, he couldn't help but feel a lump form in his throat. These people weren't just employees, they were family. Together, they had created something that extended beyond the walls of the restaurant, a sense of belonging, of purpose. Word of the restaurant's success spread quickly, attracting attention from other corners of the city. Food bloggers raved about the warm atmosphere and flawless execution. Regular customers brought friends, turning weekend dinners into lively gatherings. Even rival restaurateurs stopped by, curious to see what made this place stand out. One night, a well-known chef visited incognito, blending in with the crowd. After finishing his meal, he approached the manager and introduced himself. "I have to say," the chef said with a grin, "you've got something special here. Not just the food, everything. How did you pull it off?" The manager chuckled, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "Honestly, a lot of trial and error, and a whole lot of help from people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The chef nodded thoughtfully. "That's rare these days. Most people think success comes overnight, but it's the ones who put in the work, the blood, sweat, and tears, who really make an impact." Those words stuck with the manager long after the chef left. He realized that while the spotlight often shone on individuals, true success was built on collaboration. It was the late-night brainstorming sessions with his team, the hours spent perfecting recipes with the chefs, the countless conversations with customers that shaped the soul of the restaurant. Every person played a part, no matter how small, it seemed. But success also came with challenges. As the restaurant grew more popular, demand skyrocketed, putting pressure on the staff and resources. Lines formed outside during peak hours, and reservations became nearly impossible to secure. While this was a sign of triumph, it also tested the limits of what they could handle. There were days when things felt chaotic, when orders got mixed up, tables turned over too slowly, and tempers flared. On those days, the manager reminded himself of the owner's advice. Stay calm, lead by example, and focus on solutions rather than problems. One such day stood out vividly. A large group arrived without a reservation, insisting they be seated. Immediately, despite the packed house. When told there would be a wait, they grew frustrated, raising their voices and causing a scene. Nearby tables looked on uncomfortably as tension filled the air. The hostess tried to defuse the situation, but the group refused to back down. Seeing the commotion, the manager stepped in. With a calm demeanor, he addressed the upset patrons. "I understand your frustration, and I apologize for the inconvenience. Unfortunately, we're at full capacity right now, but I'd love to offer you complimentary drinks at the bar while you wait. We'll do everything we can to accommodate you as soon as possible." His tone was firm yet empathetic, striking a balance between professionalism and understanding. Slowly, the group's anger melted away, replaced by reluctant acceptance. They agreed to wait, and within 20 minutes a table opened up. By the end of their meal, they were laughing and joking with the staff, leaving behind glowing feedback. Later that night, the hostess thanked the manager for stepping in. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," she admitted. "If it were me, I might have lost it." He smiled gently. "We've all been there. The key is remembering that we're not just solving problems, we're making memories. Those moments define whether someone comes back or not." This philosophy became a cornerstone of the restaurant's culture. No matter how stressful things got, the team focused on creating positive experiences for their guests. Whether it was surprising a regular customer with their favorite dessert or going above and beyond to accommodate a special request, they poured their hearts into every interaction. And it paid off, not just in repeat business but in loyalty and trust. As months turned into years, the manager began thinking about the future. Running one successful restaurant was rewarding, but he couldn't shake the idea of doing more. What if he could take what he'd learned and expand it further? Maybe open another location, or even mentor others who dreamed of starting their own ventures. The owner noticed the change in him. During one of their regular check-ins, he asked, "What's next for you? You've accomplished so much already, but I can tell you're ready for something bigger." The manager hesitated, unsure of how to articulate his thoughts. "I want to give back," he finally said. "Not just to this team, but to anyone who needs a second chance like I did. I want to show people that it's never too late to start over." The owner smiled knowingly. "Sounds like you're ready to write your own story." With that encouragement, the manager began laying the groundwork for his next chapter. He started mentoring young workers, sharing his experiences and offering guidance to those eager to learn. He partnered with local organizations to provide training programs for underprivileged youth, giving them hands-on experience in the hospitality industry. And when the time felt right, he took the leap, opening his very own restaurant, inspired by everything he'd learned along the way. On opening night, the owner showed up unannounced, slipping quietly into the crowd. When the manager spotted him, he rushed over, beaming with pride. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward the bustling dining room. The owner looked around, taking in the vibrant energy and happy faces. Then he turned back to the manager and said simply, "It's perfect." For the manager, those two words meant the world. They weren't just validation. They were proof that the journey he'd embarked on years ago had come full circle. From the young waiter who once muttered insults under his breath to the leader standing tall in his own establishment, he had transformed in ways he never imagined. And through it all, he carried one truth close to his heart. Success isn't measured by titles or accolades. It's measured by the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. Years passed, and the manager's new restaurant became a cornerstone of the community. It wasn't just another dining spot. It was a place where people gathered to celebrate milestones, share stories, and find comfort in good food and warm company. The walls were adorned with photos of happy customers, handwritten notes of gratitude from regulars, and even artwork created by local kids during charity events hosted at the restaurant. Every detail told a story, reflecting the values the manager had learned along his journey: kindness, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserved a second chance. The staff he'd built mirrored this philosophy. Many of them came from backgrounds similar to his own, young, unsure, and searching for direction. Some had stumbled into the job by accident. Others saw it as their last hope after hitting rock bottom. But under his guidance, they flourished. He didn't just teach them how to serve or cook. He taught them how to believe in themselves. Each employee carried a piece of his legacy, spreading positivity and determination wherever they went. One evening, during a quiet lull between dinner services, the manager sat alone at a corner table, sipping coffee and flipping through an old photo album. It was filled with memories from the past decade, snapshots of chaotic kitchen prep sessions, team outings, grand openings, and candid moments with customers. As he turned the pages, one picture caught his eye: a grainy image of him standing beside the owner on the day of his promotion, both men smiling proudly despite the exhaustion etched on their faces. He chuckled softly, remembering how overwhelmed he'd felt back then. At the time, taking on such responsibility had seemed impossible. But now, looking back, he realized that every challenge had been a stepping stone, a lesson wrapped in struggle, pushing him closer to who he was meant to become. That realization hit him harder than ever before. Success wasn't about reaching some ultimate destination. It was about embracing the journey, flaws and all. And while he'd achieved things he once thought unattainable, he knew none of it would have mattered if he hadn't stayed true to himself and the people around him. Later that week, the manager decided to host a special event, a celebration not just of the restaurant's success, but of the people who made it possible. He invited former employees, loyal customers, suppliers, and anyone else who had played a role in its growth over the years. When the night arrived, the space buzzed with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Everyone mingled freely, swapping stories and reminiscing about shared experiences. At one point, the manager stood up to address the crowd. Holding a glass of champagne, he looked out at the sea of familiar faces and felt a surge of emotion. "This isn't my story," he began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "It's ours. Every single one of you has contributed to making this place what it is today. Without your hard work, your trust, and your belief in me when I didn't believe in myself, none of this would exist." The room erupted in applause, but he held up a hand to continue. "When I first started working in restaurants, I thought it was just a job, a way to pay the bills. But over time, I realized it's so much more than that. It's about connection, about creating spaces where people feel seen, valued, and loved. That's why I'll never stop striving to do better. For you, for our community, and for anyone who walks through those doors." As the cheers subsided, someone called out, "What's next for you? Are you going to open more places?" He grinned, shaking his head slightly. "Who knows? Maybe. But whatever comes next, I want it to be rooted in the same principles: helping others, lifting people up, and proving that no matter where you start, you can build something meaningful." The night ended with hugs, promises to stay in touch, and a renewed sense of camaraderie among everyone present. For the manager, it was a reminder of why he did what he did. Not for fame or fortune, but for the relationships forged along the way. In the months that followed, the manager kept his promise. He expanded his efforts beyond the restaurant, partnering with local schools to offer workshops on entrepreneurship and hospitality. He mentored aspiring chefs, sharing not only technical skills but also the importance of perseverance and humility. And whenever someone thanked him for his guidance, he simply smiled and said, "Pay it forward. That's how we keep the cycle going." One day, while walking through the bustling dining room, he paused to watch a young server greet a table of guests. There was something familiar about the way the server carried himself, confident yet approachable, eager to learn but unafraid to admit when he didn't know something. It reminded the manager of his younger self, full of potential waiting to be unlocked. After the lunch rush, he pulled the server aside. "How are you finding the job?" he asked casually. The server shrugged, smiling nervously. "It's tough, but I like it. I'm still learning, though. The manager nodded, recognizing the honesty in the response. You're doing great. Keep pushing yourself. You never know where this path might lead. The server looked surprised, but grateful. Thanks, that means a lot. As the manager walked away, he couldn't help but smile. This was what it was all about. The passing of wisdom, the giving of opportunities, the endless cycle of growth. Someday, this young server might stand where he stood now, leading his own team, building his own legacy. And when that day came, he hoped the server would remember the lessons he'd been taught and pass them on to someone else. Years later, when the manager finally decided to step back from the daily grind, he left behind more than a successful business. He left behind a community united by shared values, countless lives touched by his generosity, and a reminder that success isn't measured by wealth or titles. It's measured by the impact we leave on the world and the people who carry our light forward long after we're gone.